We're about to start the next presentation. This is Justin from our support and development team. He's going to go through some of the pieces of the admin client, so a little bit more on the technical side. He will go through a few bits and pieces, and then we're going to open it up, ask questions. He'll be able to demonstrate things. What I will ask is even more important that before you ask your question, you wait for the microphone to arrive, because he will have no clue what your question is, because he's going to be relying on this microphone.
Hi everybody. I'm Justin Leese. As Graham mentioned, I'm part of our kind of support and development team here at DataSplice. So I'd like to kind of give you an overview of the administration client that we use and that we package with DataSplice that gives us the ability to kind of create and edit applications for use with Maximo, or not with Maximo, but since this is a Maximo mug, we'll say it's Maximo. So what we're looking at on screen now is the administrative client. When you first launch it, it brings you to a list of kind of servers you've logged into at least once before. So I'm going to edit one of our development servers, so I'll just log in. And we're brought to a screen that's a high-level overview of the DataSplice server settings itself, as well as settings that pertain to individual plugins, like the Maximo plugin. So we have things like how many CPU threads the server can use, how many minutes does it take until users get timed out, like an idle timeout. We can see our license count, things like that on the screen. And probably most importantly to people of the audience is the Maximo plugin settings. If I click Maximo plugin, we have to point it to a JVM for use for communicating with Maximo, a list of Java classes for communicating with Maximo, and then the Maximo address, username, password. And then down here we get a nice little status message that just says everything's okay or not okay. If it's not okay, it'll give us some detail into what we need to do to troubleshoot. On the next screen, we have our roles. Roles can either be inherited from Maximo security groups, or they could be individual Maximo users, or you could create users completely separate from Maximo. They just won't be able to perform Maximo-related operations. So you could kind of think as a DataSplice role in the same concept as a Maximo security group, where we have a role which either has other security groups as members, or it might have individual people, such as, I could add our demo user Wilson explicitly to a security group. So that way we can kind of have a parent-child relationship, and children roles will inherit settings from their parent roles. So on this screen we have the list of members of this role. The role is called Maximo Work Orders. It has two members. One is a security group, which is the Max Admin security group, and then Wilson I just added explicitly as a single member. And then we have some settings that are unique to the Maximo Work Orders roles. In DataSplice we call these attributes. It's kind of stored, either stored results from previous operations, or they could be stored text or stored actions in which we can call upon later on in the application. And I'll show you those when we get to them later on. And also on the role screen, we have the ability to toggle on and off kind of bits and pieces of data that these users have access to. So the Maximo Work Orders role would obviously have access to data relevant to manipulating work orders. We can do other things on this screen, like special events for when the user logs in. So on the parent Maximo role, we have a logged in event in which we can fire off chains of events based on, or chains of actions based on events. So on this logged in event, detects when a user has logged in and then executes these two actions in order. One is the default action, which just lets the user log in. And the next one is to cache some lookups, which means once they're cached, the browser or app doesn't then have to request that information from the server again. So we're expecting whatever information is cached to not be volatile. And then on the next screen, we have our list of DataSplice views. And this is where probably myself and our other support members spend most of our time, kind of living in this list of DataSplice views. Some of them connect to Maximo, some of them don't, but most of them look like this. I've selected the work orders view, and it all starts with a base SQL statement. I've told the view that I want to connect to a database. I've told it I want to connect to the Maximo database. And here I'm executing a kind of generic or not so generic SQL statement against the database to retrieve information. When DataSplice communicates with Maximo, we have the option to write back directly to the database, but we never do. Whenever we write back to Maximo, we want to make sure our entries pass through all the Maximo validation that Maximo has. We don't want to bypass it by inserting directly to the database. So what we do is we retrieve information read-only from the database, and then we push the data back. We always go through the MBOs themselves and not through the database. So it starts with the SQL statement, and that gives us a list of columns that have been returned. We can give them friendly names, like here we've renamed wonum to work order. That way when a user sees it, if they see wonum, they may not know what that is, but if they see work order, of course, they'll know it's work order. We can change the properties of the view itself. Things like, should the search box auto-collapse when they insert this view? We can toggle a message that's given at the top of the view. We can create a new message every time the user clicks a record within the view. And then down here we just have some more kind of stored either results or stored functions that we can execute within the context of the view. So once we have our SQL statement and we've returned some columns and we've given them some friendly names, we can go over to field settings and change properties of the fields themselves. Now I'm going to hop over to the to a browser that I have open pointed at the server so we can actually see some changes occur as I manipulate the admin client. Here we go. Can you see that all right? That Chrome browser? I can probably make that a little bigger.
Yeah, just zoom. There you go. That's good.
Okay. So the view that we're manipulating in the admin client is the work orders view. So I'll bring up an entry point into the work orders view. In this particular example, it's been further filtered down into just work orders assigned to me. Oh, and someone shut down my server. That's right. So when I click on a work order and I start it, I can see that a message has been brought up to the top of the view. All that is configurable. All right, I'm going to hop back over to the admin client so you can see me making the change. All right, so the property I'm editing here is the view message. And we can see the view message is built from a combination of different functions. We have an entire library of functions that you can execute within DataSplice to retrieve different bits of information, either from the current context, or you can query to other parts of the application to get access to more data. So here's just one example. Hopefully this is big enough that you can kind of read the text in here. So basically we're saying test if there's an open labor work order ID. And open labor work order ID refers to one of the saved bits of information, like down here. And we can see that fires off another query to labor reporting. So I won't go into details, but I'll just explain that open labor work order ID, the result of this is to tell us whether or not there's a work order currently with open labor. So the labor's been started, but it hasn't been stopped. I'll go back into view message. So test if we have a work order in which labor has not been stopped. If we do, we want to print this message, working on, and then we query for the work order and its description. If not, we return just null. So it's a blank value in which we'll collapse the description at the top of the view. So if I manipulate this and I say, currently working on, and then I'll save it, and then I'll switch back to the browser so we can see the change we made. So previously it said working on, which we can see here. If I refresh the page, which is the kind of development cycle for people building DataSplice applications, you make a change to the admin client, you refresh the page. We see now it says currently working on. So that's how easy it is to make change and test things within DataSplice. Just make a change to the admin client, save, come back to the browser, refresh the page, and you see your change appear on screen. So this lets us kind of rapidly make changes, and it enables us to kind of be on the phone with you guys, have you suggest changes, we can make them on the fly and verify whether or not they suit your needs. All right, so currently working on 1202. If I stop work, we can see our message goes away. I'll switch back to the admin client. So that's just the first tab of the views. Second tab is changing the behavior of individual fields. For example, the work order field, we always want to be uppercase. We don't want the work order number to be editable. It's that way in Maximo as well. You can't change the work order number once it's created. If I select the status field, we can see we want it to show a list of available statuses, and we only want it to be editable when it's not a new record. Because when we create a new work order, we always want it to be waiting approved status. So we only want the status to be able to be changed when it's a record that has been submitted to Maximo and actually created in the database. We can also change whether or not that field can be searched for, how it gets sorted, whether or not it's visible at all. And all of these can be controlled via the combination of functions. We can use simple true or false values, or we can use combinations of DataSplice functions like test, or is today Wednesday, then if so, the status field is editable. All those things are just built from a combination of functions that result in a true or false result and determine the desired action. Is there any questions about that, or would you like to see an example of kind of combining some functions together?
Justin, could you take a look at the long description and see what the visible is setting to?
Sure. So if I click on long description, I can see the validation style is long text, or HTML text, which means if I view it in detail, I actually get in kind of simple HTML editor for the long description. Things like that. I can create bullet points, upload to Maximo, and it would go into Maximo formatted just like this.
Yeah, we can't see your other screen at the moment. But while you're on this one, on the admin client, if you can make the long description conditional so that it only appears in the single record view, but not in the list.
Sure. So I would find the visibility condition, which is here. And if I change the condition to, you only want it to show up in record mode, is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I usually just copy it off the lead field or something like that, but just record mode.
So I know that the function I need is called display mode. So I'll execute that, and then I'll compare the result to record. All this is documented and online. If you have a question about what a function does, all the documentation is on our docs.datasplice.com site. So I'm executing display mode. I'm comparing it with the text record. So if display mode is record, this evaluates to true, and our field should be visible. So I'll save it. I'll switch back to the browser so we can see our change. I'll go back to the grid. Refresh. All right, so we're looking at the grid, and we can see that long description is no longer visible in the grid. But when I view it in detail, we've now launched record mode. So display mode here evaluates the record, and we can see the visibility has changed. Anything else, Graham?
Yeah, could you just go back to the list view?
Hi, could you make the description fields in that list tab so that the text wraps so you can see the entire description?
Row height?
That's a good question. Yeah, we can increase the row height in which we can display more than one row in the description. So if I go to the view settings, I can toggle the row height. By default, it's one default value, so this is considered 1.
Wrong screen.
I'll change it to 2. Yep. So here, I'm on the Settings and Attributes tab. There's a row height option. I'll change it to, say, 4. So it'll be 4 times its original value. I'll save it, switch back to browser. It keeps timing me out because the HTML proxy is set really low. But we can see once I'm logged back in and I've refreshed the page that the description is now, if there were to be more text here, like compressor quarterly inspection certificate, we can see that it wraps.
It's easier for the operators on a small screen with fat fingers. Instead of working in that single row height, you've got all that real estate. It's like a pseudo cards display until we release our cards version soon. Is that what you were looking for, Wilson?
Yes, that accomplishes it. That's fine because your descriptions are only going to be there's a set length usually to the descriptions anyway. So either column width or row height should accomplish that. We might have talked about it yesterday. Is there a way to update or change the text size? Or maybe that was a question we were going to ask.
I don't think we can change the text size, can we, Justin? Either on the device or within DataSplice?
Not within DataSplice, but in some aspects, the browser or app will respect the settings you have on the device itself. So for example, on Android, you can go change the visibility and accessibility settings to increase the text size across the entire operating system. And within DataSplice, it will grow the text accordingly.
Demonstrate the creation of a new event tied to a pop-up or a button.
Sure.
How that works.
So the way events work in DataSplice is we have a list of kind of hooks that we can hook into. So for example, like I mentioned earlier, when the user logs in, we can hook into that. When the user clicks on a new record, we can tie into that. When a user edits a field from one value to another, we can hook into that. So once we've hooked into an event, we can fire off these chains of actions. So I'll switch to the admin client and we'll create a new one. For example, the verify field event for description. So the example I'm going to use is if I edit the description field and I enter a certain value into the description field, I want it to throw me an error and say that value I entered is inappropriate. So I'll hook into the verify field event for description. We have down here our list of actions that are tied in to that event. The default action in this case is to accept the value that was entered. So I want to keep that there because eventually I want the value to go into the field. If it's inappropriate, I want it to reject. But otherwise, I want it to go into the field. So I need to keep the default action. I'll just add more actions to this event. So here I want to prompt the user. I want to say this value, and then I'll give it the text that was entered is inappropriate. I want it to be an error, so I'll take away the OK button. So when the user sees this prompt, the only option they'll have is to cancel their action. And the condition for the display prompt is if the value entered into description is ASDF. So if I type ASDF into a description field, it should throw this prompt telling me that's inappropriate. I'll save that, refresh. I'll start creating a new work order. So here I have the description field. If I type something normal, like test, it's going to accept it. But if I go back and type ASDF, it tells me this error, this value ASDF is inappropriate, and you can see it's rejected my change to ASDF. So ASDF, click, it's reset it back to test, what it was previously. So this combination of things that fire events, like verify field, when I click a button, if I create a new record, these are all event hooks. So the combination of event hooks and the event actions themselves, like the display prompt that we created, let us do kind of extremely complicated actions within DataSplice, but we can test them very quickly.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or requests of Justin that you may want to have covered?
So I was wondering if you have any tips or anything on the self-installation upgrade area, or is that something?
Yeah, we were going to cover that with the customer today, but what we can do, we have a video of the whole process step by step and an instruction book that says this is how you install DataSplice in your environment, and we can provide that separately. The record I've seen installing DataSplice and processing work orders in a max demo environment is 11 minutes. Realistically, in a classroom environment or in a real environment, it takes longer. So we decided not to include it in this, but we can definitely cover that separately. It's a relatively simple process, and we'll give you that. Yeah.
Yep. For those of you that have been through a DataSplice installation before, you know that installing the DataSplice software is pretty simple. Getting the software downloaded and installed is probably a 5 to 10 minute task, and then the majority of the time of an installation is spent diagnosing networking issues between DataSplice and the Maximo database, or DataSplice and the Maximo MBOs themselves, and setting up Java.
Can you show us how to do something like adding a button to a work order task that might need to, if it's selected or if it's checked, then that would send a specific value back to a Maximo field for that task?
Sure.
Great.
So we have out of the box a task screen that looks like this. So on work order 1006, if I go into tasks, I see there's 7 of them. So one thing we can do is, let's see, we already have a feature to change the status. How about I walk you through how this is done? When I click done, you see the status changed and the inspector is set to my current user. We can recreate that, or we'll hook it up to a new button. That's probably a better example. So back on the admin client, we have a view for work order tasks, and I'm looking at the list of events. So to create a button on screen, it starts with what's called a custom event. So it's not tying into any existing hooks. We're creating a new hook. We'll call it change status, and we'll populate it with some actions. So the first action I want it to do is change the value of status to, let's say it's comp. I want it to change the value of the inspector field to my current user. So now we have a custom event that modifies these 2 fields. The last step is to take that custom event and turn it into a button. So on the display settings page, there's a navigation menu, which is the area where buttons go. And if I select this drop down, I can see my custom event is now available as an option. So I'll set it there. I'll save it. we'll go back to the browser and refresh. Work order 1006. Look at my tasks. So now we have a new button at the top. If I select a record and hit the button, we see we've changed the status and we've set the inspector. And when I upload this, it's already configured to go into Maximo.
Is it just as simple to add like extra checkboxes? Like we have more than one. It's not just either done or not done. It's done or service required or not applicable or not done. Are those things pretty simple to add in as far as like additional checkboxes, and can those checkboxes look like different things? Like can it be a box with you know, an ND in the middle of it for not done, so they don't have to know which?
It sounds like in your case you'd want maybe a drop-down selector, kind of like status has a drop-down selector over here in which you select a value.
Yeah, we'd prefer to go single button press just because it's one less thing it's one less step.
Sure.
Right.
So then you would change it to, on the click of a button, you would change that particular field to, say, service requested.
Correct.
Is that field also available in Maximo? Like, does it
Yes.
have a database table behind it? Good.
It does, yes.
So let's see if we can pull in one of the other fields. Max status, observation. So let's try and use the observation field. So I'll go find observation and I'll turn it on. I'll create a new button, starting with the custom event.
Not seeing the admin client, Justin.
Oh, sorry. There we go. So the first thing I did is just verified that we included observation in our SQL select statement. So we get the field from the database in which we can manipulate. So we do have it. So the next thing I did is I determined that it's visible and it's editable by the user. And then I went to event handling and I started creating a new custom event called, we'll call it set observation. So I want to modify an attribute, which is modifying a field in the record. I want to modify the observation field, and we'll drop in the text service requested. The last thing I have to do is change the way we send data back to Maximo. Since we're using a field that we weren't previously manipulating, I'll check the update record. Update record is when you update data within a record and send it back to Maximo. This is the event of actions that occur. So I can see I'm tying into Maximo, I'm updating an MBO, I'm updating a work order because tasks are technically work orders. And lucky for us, observation is already here. So this just verifies that when I make a change to observation in DataSplice, that change also gets sent to Maximo. Next, I'll add our set observation button to the navigation menu. Save it. Switch back to Chrome. Refresh. Work order 1006 has our tasks. So we can see our observation field is now present, visible and editable. If I hit our set observation button, the value entered is service requested. And if I upload all this, it'll all go back into Maximo.
Bottom line, we can't create that labeled button in there like you described. We can do the checkboxes, or we can do the status change through a drop-down, through a button. So it's not exactly as you see in what you have now, but the exact same function can be achieved in a slightly different way.
So here we're reading an error back from Maximo, and this is why we insert data back through Maximo instead of manipulating the database directly. So here, Maximo has received our request to change observation to service request, and Maximo has returned this error to us and said the value specified service requested exceeds the maximum field length. Okay, so let's troubleshoot that really quick. Back in the admin client, looking at our list of fields, I can see observation has a max length of 8. So service request is longer than that. So I'll use an acronym instead, service REQ. Save that. Go back to Chrome. Refresh the page. Set observation, SRV REQ, it's less than 8 characters. Upload it, and now that value we can see got inserted into Maximo. Hopefully that's what you wanted me to demonstrate.
Yeah, that'll work. Right now we have the buttons laid out horizontally, like across from the task, so they don't have to select a task and then press the button at the top. I mean, it could be done, it looks like, with checkboxes as well, like those could be lined out maybe in different columns or something, or even a drop down like you said. But
yep, you could turn service requested into an additional column, just simply represented by a checkbox.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be the best way in yours, and then it would only be a problem if your list of tasks was so long it went off the bottom of the screen, and you may not see that.
Oh, that's a question. Yeah, if it is 100 tasks long, does the top header go away, like on the iPad, or does the header stay? Can you make it stay?
Just that. Justin, maybe have a look at the work order search and bring back more than a page of records and just show how the scrolling works.
Sure. Work order search. Do a search for generic.
There you go.
So the column names always stay at the top.
Yeah. Question from Alex?
So we have clients, and we haven't got this yet, that use routes with a multi-asset location where they may have the one work order with 50 locations or assets against that one work order. When we go into Maximo, that's base, and we're going through, how do we say that we, is that built in where we can just say we completed, like a checkbox against each of the values of the multi-asset record, where you say complete, so I could say I hit all 50 of those?
Yeah, we would do that in a similar way to what you just saw with the tasks. Put the checkbox down there, and what you can also do is do all those inspections or tasks. Say there are 5 or 6 quick things in a row, and you do them one after the other. Then you pick up your device and check them, and then at the top it can say complete all, and do it all in one go.
Out of the box, is it set up for the multi-asset location? Or we have to do that?
There is some included. Do we have any multi-asset in this one, Justin?
We do not in this environment.
Logged it because that's an advanced feature everybody's always looking for the routes. So you could just basically say done, 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 done in the multi-asset location before you close out the work.
Yeah, it would take some minor configuration right now. We don't have it in our off-the-shelf Maximo plugin, the 80% stuff, right. But we've configured it in a few places, so it will be moved into that, and then you will be able to just switch it on and tweak it to your needs fairly soon.